Did the Jerusalem Conference of Acts 15 say that we now don't have to keep the Ten Commandments? What was the issue here? The issue here was those that said you had to be circumcised to be saved. Verse 1, and certain men which came down from Judea taught the brethren and said, except ye be circumcised after the manner of Moses, ye cannot be saved. Verse 5 also mentions certain of the sect of the Pharisees which believed, saying that it was needful to circumcise them. That was the issue. Those that said you had to be circumcised to be saved. Nothing to do with 10 Commandments. Verse 19, wherefore my sentence is that we trouble not them which from among the Gentiles are turned to God, but that we write unto them that they abstain from pollutions of idols, and from fornication, and from things strangled, and from blood. Those are all things associated with idolatry. And notice, there's no prohibition in those four things against murder, against stealing, against lying, against taking God's name in vain, or dishonoring your parents. Does that mean we're free to do that now? Of course not. And yet some people that don't know what they're talking about will say this means we don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore because it's not mentioned here. Well, neither is the command to not take God's name in vain. Nobody would be stupid enough to claim we don't have to keep that command anymore. Now, what does the NIV say about this verse? Verse 19, their study note. Circumcision was not required, but four stipulations were laid down. These were in areas where the Gentiles had particular weaknesses and where the Jews were particularly repulsed by Gentile violations. It would help both the individual and the relationship between Gentile and Jew if these requirements were observed. Their note on verse 20, sexual immorality, a sin taken too lightly by the Greeks and also associated with certain pagan religious festivals. These prohibitions in verse 20 were all associated with idolatry. By keeping these new commandments, they could then fellowship with the Jews. And as verse 21 says, Moses of old time has in every city them that preach him, being read in the synagogues every Sabbath day. By not keeping these idolatrous practices, they would be able to go into the synagogue with the Jews to learn the word of God. Once again, notice there's nothing in those commandments against murder, against stealing, or against lying, or taking God's name in vain. Nobody would be stupid enough to claim we can now break those commands. And yet they say that about the Sabbath since it's not mentioned there. Once again, these prohibitions were things associated with idolatry. That's all. So they would then be able to fellowship with the Jewish believers. Peace all. Bye-bye.